Okay, and welcome, my friends, once again to another episode here of the live Red Delta Project podcast, live stream Q&A and excuse me, YouTube channel here, where we take a fundamental approach to diet and exercise to simplify this whole diet and exercise chutzpah. It can be quite the mess from time to time now, can't it? And one of the biggest reasons why we often find ourselves with so much frustration and so much difficulty getting what we want isn't because of a lack of hard work or motivation, because anybody who picks up a dumbbell or resolves to eat a little bit better has clearly motivation and the desire to do things better. But instead, it's where we're focusing our attention. Because one of the most important things you can do to improve everything about your health and fitness and your quality of life, and almost anything in life really, is where you focus and direct your attention, because your attention is by far your most valuable asset. It's your most valuable resource. It's more valuable than your time and your money and your energy. Why? Because where you focus your attention will dictate how you spend your time and your money and your energy. And one of the things that plagues most people who are struggling is they're just simply focusing on the wrong things, which hurts you two ways. One is you're focusing on the things that honestly aren't really that important and doing that much for you. So you're wasting a lot of your resources in the wrong direction. And you're also simultaneously ignoring and not putting much of your resources towards the things that are truly important. So it's really hurting you on both fronts here. But the good news is that it's relatively easy to correct, because once you get focused on the things that are important, then you reverse the whole process and things get a heck of a lot easier. So let's dive right on in. And also, I forgot to mention, of course, as always, this week's episode is sponsored by the expanding RDP library on Amazon and the RDP merch store, if you want to just use PDFs instead of Kindle and paperback formats, because I'm starting a very new series, which I call the Fitness Simplified Quick Reads. And these quick reads are basically simple short Kindle or PDF formats. They're only about 20 pages or so, but they focus on a very specific idea and topic that helps you greatly simplify diet, exercise, or a combination thereof to make this whole staying in shape thing a hell of a lot easier. So links to those and everything is down below in the description. And CJ Watson's coming on in. Hey, CJ, it's good to talk to you. So what are we focusing on that is not so much important? And that's not to say these things aren't important at all. It's just that they're not that important. So you're putting all your eggs into the wrong proverbial basket. So first and foremost is the idea of both burning and storing fat. Lots of ideas out there about how you should eat and how you should exercise are about, oh, you do this, you burn fat. Oh, you do that, you store fat and everything. And of course, yes, these ideas may have some validity to it, but to be perfectly honest with you, I stopped caring whether or not I'm burning or storing fat years ago. It was one of the best things I ever did, because honestly, it's really not that important. I know on the surface it seems important. It's like, dude, if I want to lose weight, don't I need to burn fat? Or if I don't want to get fatter, don't I need to prevent fat storage? Not really. And the reason is because both fat storage and burning fat are always happening to everybody 24/7, no matter what you do. This is a basic fact of human physiology. There's that idea that if you're trying to lose weight, that you're somehow locking fat into your fat cells, and it's just sort of staying there stagnant, not doing anything. And then you do a particular diet or exercise habit or something, and you're unlocking it and you're freeing the fat from the fat cells and stuff. It's not at all how it works. Your fat cells are stagnant, but the fat in the cells is on constant turnover. You're always storing fat, regardless of diet and exercise habits, and you're always burning fat, regardless of diet and exercise habits. These things are happening on complete autopilot, and when we change diet and exercise, nothing's really happening that isn't already happening in the first place. The ability to control whether or not you're gaining or losing body fat has almost nothing to do with storing and burning it. It's the ratio between the speeds at which you're burning and storing it. And yeah, we may be able to have some variables like, okay, if I eat this food, doesn't that mean I'm slowing down the rate at which I'm storing it? Potentially. But there's a lot more to the rate at which you store and burn fat than just eating carbs and sugar. There's a lot more to burning fat than if you're working out in like some sort of particular heart rate zone or what kind of exercise you're doing. There's many variables that influence the rate at which you burn and store fat, many of which we're still even figuring out. We don't know the whole picture yet. So whenever we take our attention and we focus on one particular way of eating or exercise habit, it's like, okay, this is going to make me burn fat or store fat. What you're not doing is saying, okay, body, burn fat or prevents fat storage. Even though you think that's happening, that's not what you're doing. But what you are doing is saying, limit the amount of attention I have on how I'm storing fat or burning fat between the two. So it's a very limited perspective. And no matter how much you try to maximize that one thing you're focusing on, like carbs or sugar or cardio or whatever, it's always going to be a very limited approach. No matter how hard you work at it, no matter how much attention you put into it, you can focus on that glycemic index and insulin levels and heart rate zones and all these sorts of things all day, every day, and it's still going to be extremely limited in its approach, which is why a lot of people get some initial gain from it, but then it just kind of falls flat. And that's why we often fall for these things. We focus on the wrong thing, is because initially it produces some degree of success and effort and some sort of win. And we think, oh, good, I solved the puzzle. It's like, no, not really. You just put two pieces together, but there's still 1,000 other pieces or 998 other pieces that you still have to figure out, but you're just focusing on those two and thinking you've got the whole thing solved. So how do we do these sorts of things? Well, instead of focusing on whether you're burning or whether you're storing, focus more on just the general energy balance. And no, I'm not talking about calorie counting, even though that is fundamentally what it boils down to on the physical level, but instead looking at general physical activity and energy output throughout the day, every day, outside of exercise, outside of what you're doing, and general energy intake outside of those specific nutritional variables. Like you could be counting your carbohydrates and avoiding sugar all day long, but the other caloric sources of particularly fat, protein, especially alcohol, that still counts. It's not like it's a moot influence that just disappears in the body through some sort of hocus pocus when you eat that Salisbury steak and down a few shots of vodka. It still is contributing to that overall energy balance. So we want that 30,000 foot view of how much energy in general am I putting out on a daily basis and how much am I taking in on a daily basis. Whenever you have your attention so focused on one particular aspect of your intake or expenditure, you're always having a very limited approach. And I don't know about you, but I sure don't want a limited approach. I'd rather take a much bigger approach and have a lot of variables that I'm considering to have a bigger impact rather than maximizing a minor impact to things. So that's number one. I don't care if I'm burning fat. I don't care if I'm storing fat. I just look more overall of how much food am I eating each day. I don't even count calories and stuff. It's just, am I eating a lot more now than I usually do? Or am I being more active than I usually am? If we've got, out here in Denver, we've had some pretty big snowstorms and things. If I notice I'm not getting out as much, I'm not riding my bike as much, for a few weeks, I'm barely working out at all, I know my energy output is lower than before. So I'm going to have to adjust my diet accordingly. I don't have numbers to associate with it, but it doesn't matter. All I know is that my energy output overall is lower. So I need to be more aware that I'm not quite as active and burning as much as I normally do. Let's see if we can get to some questions on in here. Gatsu Brando, hey Matt, because as always, if you put a hey Matt in the subject line, I can answer it and get to it more readily. After 2 weeks, a lot of sitting and standing, middle of spine a bit hurts, on the left side hurts, but it's weird. Skin is sensitive, like it has a burn wound. I've been doing exercises and it seems to help. That is interesting. As I talked about in my last episode last week about pain, anytime we've got chronic pain, definitely get it checked out. That's the best way to get a diagnosis. I was just speaking with a client over the past week, and he's had this chronic pain for like 3 years. And I was encouraging him, like, okay, see somebody, do this, do that, go get some eyes on it. I recommended his chiropractor, who practically saved my chiropractor who saved my training career, several years ago, and he always started off with just straight up x-rays. It's like, oh, your back hurts? Okay, now I'm not saying you need x-rays, but it's like, oh, let's get in there and see exactly what's going on, because you want a very accurate diagnosis. Most people just do a lot of guesswork when it comes to pain management, which is ineffective at worst and very inefficient at best. It's like, yeah, I got it fixed after 6 months. It's like, yeah, but you could have gotten it fixed in 6 days. So try and get someone some eyes on it, or even eyes for yourself. If the skin itself is sensitive, have someone take a picture of your back in bathroom lighting or something, and see if maybe you've got something going on there that needs to be addressed with some ointments or something. But definitely get that checked out. Dave is coming on in. Hey, Matt, what are your recommendations for returning to a long-term goal after being sidetracked? You just return to it, my friend. There's no real ways of looking at it. Of course, start with wherever you're at. Sometimes I'll have people come back into training after being on a hiatus for a while. And I always have those next workouts where I tell them it's what I call a re-entry workout, where it's like, let's just see what you got. Let's see. I've got the scoreboard pulled up, and I ask them, do you think you can match these numbers? And they may be like, oh yeah, I'm sure I can still do it. I'm like, I don't know. All right, push-ups. Let's see what you can do. Last time you got 25. Let's just see where you're at. And then they get like 16. Like, okay, you're at 16. But you just keep going with the habits as is. You don't necessarily make any big changes or adjustments. You just do what you could do from before. And more importantly, if you did get sidetracked from something in particular, and especially if you find this is a recurring event, like, oh, I'm doing gangbusters in the gym for about 6 weeks, and then it just kind of falls and trails off. And then I'm back at it a few months later, and then trails off again. It's good to self-assess and really question, why did you get sidetracked, and how do you prevent that from happening again? And that way you can keep making more forward progress and momentum. But it's basically just pick up where you left off. It's kind of like, you read a book and you stop reading it, midway through for a few weeks. You don't pick it up and be like, okay, so how do I read this thing again? Nope. You just pick right up where you left off. Maybe you go to the beginning of the chapter to remind yourself of what the characters are doing, and just keep on going the way you were going. One more here before we get into topic number 2 of things I don't care about. San Diego, California. Hey, Matt, I have knee pain when doing pistol squats, but zero pain when doing lunges. Why does this happen? Hard to say, but it's probably due to hamstring and glute activation. Remember, the pistol squat is a very big range of motion exercise, and many people have trouble engaging the glutes and the hamstrings at that depth. And a lot of the times when we have knee pain, especially anterior knee pain, right on the front of it, excuse me, the issue is we don't have enough supportive tension on the muscles on the back of the leg, which usually turn off for most people when they get down to the bottom. So what I would do is start doing, practicing and warming up with very deep body weight squats, ass to grass. See if you can still get some tension in your hamstrings and your glutes. Maybe also include something like hip extensions or table bridges or some sort of hamstring and glute work beforehand, just to wake that stuff up. So that way it is potentially more engaged when you're doing the exercise. And also try along like a half range, where like pistol squats on the boxes, where you're sitting down on a box or a weight bench or a chair or ottoman or something like that, and see if that manages it a little bit better. Just ease into it a little bit. If the knee pain is medial, like on the inside, that's very common. That usually means you're not pulling your knee inwards quite enough, and you're not pushing your hip out to the side quite enough for that to need a tract right over the toes, which are pretty much on your center line, in order to be standing on your foot. And as a result, your knee is kind of going off to the side a little bit, and that's putting more stress on the medial part of the knee. Just some of the more common issues of knee pain right there. And also remember that lunges and squats should be pretty synonymous. So when you're doing your lunges, how are your lunge technique different from pistol squats, aside from that range of motion? Because ideally, a lunge is nothing more than an alternating single leg squat. And so if it's really radically different in technique, take note of that and how it's something that maybe you've got something in the lunge that needs to carry over into the pistol squat. When in doubt, film yourself. You can observe a lot by watching. All right, so topic number 2, things we focus too much on, or I find people get so distracted with, and it's causing a lot of frustration with things. So I talked in the first one, for those who are just coming on, why I don't give a damn about burning and storing fat. And instead, you want to focus on general overall energy balance. Number two is a lot of times I'll run into individuals who base all of their approaches and their hopes of success on trying to minimize and manage inflammation. Now, inflammation is one of those things that gets blown way out of context with a lot of particular approaches with diet and exercise. Because yes, absolutely, inflammation, when it gets to a high enough level, can be very problematic for your health and well-being. And it's definitely something we don't want too much of. I'm not here to say inflammation doesn't matter, I don't care at all about it. It certainly can be extremely important. But where we get off the rails a little bit is one, thinking that inflammation is the bane of our existence and it's the whole worst thing in the world. And it's the thing that is causing weight gain and all these other health issues and stuff, because that's not entirely the case. There are, in fact, some cases where your health and well-being depends on responding to inflammation to a degree. Some of the research out there suggests that when we are exercising and strength training, that part of the stimulus for muscle growth may be due somewhat in part to inflammation, because they've taken individuals who put them through strength training of very hard hypertrophic styles, and then they try to minimize inflammation with anti-inflammatories, ice baths, all these other sorts of things, and they find that it actually inhibits their ability to build muscle. So inflammation isn't always a bad thing. In fact, in many cases, it can be a very good thing. In addition to that, like burning fat and storing fat and stuff, we always have some degree of inflammation in our bodies at all times. In fact, we'd probably be pretty bad off if we never did, because our ability to handle and blunt and respond to inflammation would become so blunted that all we would do then is the slightest bit of stressful stimuli to the body, and it would quickly overload us. This is what happens a lot of times when people are very sedentary and they get extremely sore from the smallest bit of exercise. That soreness, that stiffness, is a response to the inflammation of the activity. And the good news is, of course, we adapt to it very quickly, because you could have an exercise that makes your chest really sore, and then you do that same thing the next week and it barely has it at all. It's like, yeah, your body responded to it very quickly. That's a good thing. But when you are trying to minimize and saying, I don't want any inflammation whatsoever, you're basically putting yourself in a position where you're just very weak and almost anything's going to overload you. And I'm not saying we need to embrace inflammation either, but at the same time, recognizing that the body can handle a lot of inflammation just fine. It's built to handle it. We have very resilient bodies. We've got these ideas out there that the slightest bit of inflammation is going to be this catastrophic cascade going through the body. And one, there's a hell of a lot more to those outcomes that we don't want than just inflammation. No, you can't avoid weight gain just by avoiding inflammation. No, you can't avoid poor health and performance and all these other things just by avoiding inflammation, because there's a hell of a lot more to the story than that. In addition to that, there's a lot more to inflammation than just whatever you're focusing on. You know, I was once at working out at the gym, and a friend of mine came in with some beef jerky, or not beef jerky, it was goose jerky. In fact, he was a hunter. He got some geese, gooses, and he made goose jerky, which I'd never had before. I was like, oh, this is great. Thanks. This is wonderful. And there's one guy who's like, oh, very, very, tight, straight laced about diet and everything. Is like, wait a minute, where were these geese? And he's like, I don't know. I was in Broomfield or wherever. He's like, yeah, but what kind of environment? He's like, cornfield. It was a cornfield. And he handed back the goose jerky. He's like, no, I'm not going to eat that. Corn is an inflammatory. And we're all looking at him like, is this guy even serious? Like, we don't know if the geese were even eating it. Two, if they were eating it, so what? And three, you can have corn, and even if it is an inflammatory, it's probably going to be so small and trivial that it's not even going to matter. But that's what happens when we're like, okay, you eat this food, causes inflammation, therefore never eat that food. It's a way oversimplified approach to things. And again, it creates a very limited approach that has a very weak influence, when instead what we want to be doing is focusing on something that's a much bigger influence and not putting our attention into these small trivial things. So instead of thinking, okay, I got to avoid inflammation, instead what you want to do is focus on recovery. Okay, you can't avoid inflammation. You don't even need to avoid inflammation, but we do want to make sure that we have our daily habits in place in order to recover as well from the inevitable stresses of both daily life and from exercise. Every type of exercise causes inflammation. I always shook my head at the guys at the gym who'd be like, oh, I'm never eating sugar, it causes inflammation, or red meat, inflammation. And then they just destroy themselves with 1,000 squats or 1,000,000 burpees. I'm like, that burpee workout's going to cause way more inflammation than that cupcake that you're avoiding. So we are way out of whack with our priorities when it comes to this sort of thing. So instead of saying, I'm trying to avoid inflammation, don't worry about inflammation. Your body's going to handle it just fine, unless you're doing something crazy and stupid, like eating, way too much junk food, way too much food in general. That's another thing about food. It's not just what you eat, but how much you eat, because you're going to create a degree of inflammation in your body of just how much you eat, regardless of what the content is. And you're going to have inflammation just by being physically active, going out in the sun. Here we've got, the sun. We're closer to the sun than almost anywhere else in the United States because we're here at altitude. And you're getting exposed to massive amounts of inflammation from any time I go out for a bike ride. Am I worried about it? No, I don't need to be too concerned with it, but I am making sure I'm not riding outside during the hottest part of the day without any sunscreen in the middle of summer. So we want to be sure that we're doing the best we can to recover from just the daily stresses, getting plenty of sleep, getting plenty of good food, being able to not have too many stressors in our life mentally as well, because we can induce inflammation in the body just from emotional stress and mental stress as well. So making sure that we have healthy habits, coping mechanisms, that we're not coming home from a day of stressful work and then pounding a bottle of gin and eating nothing but microwave burritos for the rest of the week. We want to make sure we have good coping mechanisms to recover. Give yourself plenty of rest in between workouts. Don't drive yourself into the ground mercilessly with every single workout. I just put up a video on the RDP YouTube channel on the smart ways to use muscular fatigue and failure in your workouts, because sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not so helpful. If you're always doing it, there's inevitably going to be times you're driving yourself into the ground when it's not going to be in your best interest to do so. So recognizing when you can will help you manage it in a way that you can recover and have a healthy dose of inflammation from it, but not excessive amounts of inflammation from it. So don't worry about inflammation. Focus more on recovery instead. That's going to be a lot better payoff for your attention. Bygone Journey coming in with some questions here. I have a weird question, Coach. I've trained on and off for years. I think before 2010, I didn't get that far due to my the strain in my neck problem and shoulder injury. So I can't have a good muscle pump or muscle control in my biceps and back. I can only engage my chest, triceps, some traps. That's what you suggest, and so on. So yeah, you're right on about that, because if your tension control is lacking, you're always going to struggle. That's the foundation of every aspect of success in training and exercise progress. Because if you have trouble engaging your muscles, there's nothing you can do that's ever going to be very productive. If you struggle to turn your lats on, you could do pull-ups all day long, you could do lat pull-downs, you could do all these different things, but if the circuitry that's turning the muscle on is pretty dull and subdued, there's no hope for you. There's nothing that can work. But the opposite's also the case. That's the good news, is once you get things fired up, then almost anything's going to work to at least some degree, and probably to a pretty good degree as long as it's working. So as always, I know I always mention it, but overcoming isometrics is a good way to address this. Scapular control and stability is also very closely linked to your ability to engage all of the muscles in the entire upper body. So make sure that you're pulling the shoulder blades back at the bottom of your push-ups. Videotape yourself when you're working out. See what your shoulders are doing. How are they moving? How much stability and control do you have? When we've got injuries, like your strain in your neck and everything, we inevitably have compensatory habits that develop from that thing, like walking with a limp. And even if the injury itself heals, you still have those compensatory habits over time. And so they can keep going indefinitely until you address them head on and say, okay, my left lat or my shoulders are not coming back, or my left shoulder is not coming back far enough when I'm doing rows or whatever. Until you identify and address those things, you're always going to be struggling with it. So videotape your techniques, see how your shoulders are moving, and maybe warm up with some overcoming isometrics for particularly those problematic muscles that you have trouble engaging, like your biceps. You just take, a yoga strap, iso trainer, or even just, holding onto the bottom of a heavy barbell on the rack and just pull against it. Just wake them up, just get them fired up. And that can go a very long way at getting those things to wake up. And that's going to be the way to get them back online, if you will. Other questions. Hey, what psychological self-help books do you read, recommend, Matt? Or is it just types of books, fitness, finance, that sort of thing? Not a whole lot, to be honest with you. In all honesty, I've kind of gotten out of a lot of the self-help kind of stuff over the years, largely because we want to be sure that the information and content we're consuming is going after a specific issue that we may have. So this is another example of focusing on the wrong things. Like, there's a lot of folks out there who will say that knowledge is power, or that we should just be reading and consuming all kinds of content in order to improve ourselves and grow and develop and other things. But a lot of times self-help is really shelf help. It's a common trope in fitness. Like, the people who struggle with weight are the ones who have the biggest diet book collection. The people who are struggling to get what they want from their workouts are the ones with thousands and thousands of books. It's not always the case, but I'm much more of a big fan of get targeted in on what are the specific challenges you're facing right now. What are the things that are holding you back? Like, oh, I keep procrastinating, or I work out for 6 weeks and then I fall off, like I said before, or I have trouble with low self-esteem and self-doubt, or whatever. The more specific you can get to what the real problem is, the less you can do this random guesswork and reading all of these books and hoping to find a golden nugget somewhere that's maybe going to help you. And so that's why when we're focusing our attention, as I was saying earlier, like about pain, like this guy, again, I was training him, it's 3 years. He's had chronic back pain. He's like, I tried this stretch and I tried this acupuncture and I tried this massage and I tried this. I'm like, what is wrong? What specifically is wrong with your back? And he's like, I don't know. I've got this disc that might be a little bit off, and I got this. I think I have a muscle. No, I think maybe what if kind of. No. Screw that. Right? Get to some place where you're like, this is exactly what's wrong. I have poor scapular control. I have this slip disc. I have this one muscle imbalance. This one muscle is not engaging well enough. I have trouble, meeting people. I have trouble with self-esteem and social settings, whatever. Get specific on exactly what the problem is, then seek solutions to that. It's a way more effective way of approaching these things, because otherwise you're just hunting and pecking and guessing and crossing your fingers and hoping that something is just going to magically work through blind luck. Even if you do stumble on a solution, then it's gonna take you far more resources, time, money, and energy to get to that. Versus, oh man, I've got a problem with a chronically elevated shoulder blade. Okay, how can I fix that? Go to an athletic trainer, a chiropractor, YouTube video, whatever. How do I fix this one specific problem? And then you go and do that. Because knowledge is not power, my friends. It's just facts. It's just information. And if the internet's taught us anything, it's that information is not going to solve our problems unless it's applied. Like the Fitbits and all these wristwatches, we got all this data and stuff going on. But unless you're using that data to be like, okay, according to this data, I need to make this change in my diet, and you do make that change, it's just entertainment. And that's all it is. That's all it tends to be. Get specific on what your challenges are and fix those challenges directly. And that's going to be a hell of a lot more effective. All right. So we've covered burn fat, store fat. I don't care about that stuff at all. Instead, it's more about general energy balance. 2, inflammation. A lot of focus and stuff out there. I think it's a complete waste of time. And unless you do have a very bad chronic level of inflammation going on, in which case, see a doctor. Don't try to just think it's going to be fixed because you don't eat bread or, avoid a certain type of exercise. Number 3, things that I think people put way too much attention on that really aren't really worth it is the particular workout routine or program you're following. A lot of times we get a lot of paralysis by analysis. I want to get the right routine. I want to get things dialed in. I want to, so I do 3 sets of 5 or 5 sets of 3 and, 5 by 5 versus 5, 3, 1. What if I do cardio first versus strength? Blah, blah, blah. A lot of noise. None of it really matters most of the time, in all honesty. because we can look at variables 100 different ways. And I know I kind of get a little bit flack from people because I'm probably the one, or not the one, but I'm probably one of a few who will probably tell you that most of the stuff out there really isn't that important. Should I do X or Y? Probably doesn't matter. See, try it and see. What if I do this and that? Probably doesn't matter. Wait and see. Because most of the time, a lot of the questions and variables we're trying to consider are too minor of an influence and too superficial that it really probably doesn't matter very much. But that doesn't get a lot of attention, because the best way to get attention on social media and videos and stuff is like, are you facing the right direction when you're working out? Because if you're facing southwest, that's going to ruin your whole workout. It's going to destroy your gains. You have to be facing northwest whenever you're working out, unless you're in the northern hemisphere. And this according to your astrological sign. And we've got to make these things seem like a big deal, because whenever we take a coach or someone can take a trivial influence and make it seem like a very big part of your success, it gets a ton of attention, and it sells books and it sells videos and stuff. And that's why when people come to me and I say, it probably doesn't matter, it's like, how can this guy say it doesn't really matter? It's like, well, because most of the stuff out there really doesn't. And that same thing goes for your routine. Honestly, I don't think your workout routine is that important. How do I know that? Simple. Because you look at a lot of people who build muscle, and there's a million different routine variables, and there's nothing consistent between any of them. Many of them have done it with full body. Some have done it with split training. Some of it done a high volume. Some of it done with low volume. Some people train once a week. Some people train every single day. Some people do it with calisthenics. Some people do it with weights. Some people do it with cardio first. Some people never do cardio. There's almost no consistent programming variable outside of some basic fundamental aspects that's related to their goals. And in that case, it's real simple. Like, are you just burning a crap ton of calories? Are you just creating progressive muscle tension? You can literally do it any way that you like, and you're probably going to get what you want. But you can also arrange and change around 1,000 different variables and not really have any big influence at all on whether or not you're just making your muscles work harder, or whether or not you're just burning more calories or improving the actual proficiency of whatever skill you're trying to improve. So instead of focusing on routine, always remember that whatever routines and plans you're using only need to satisfy 2 variables. That's it. You get these 2 things, your routine's as good as it's going to be. And those 2 things are, one is consistency. What habits can you reliably stick to? We can look at various workout plans and everything 100 different ways. I'm like, is this effective? Is this not? Bottom line, if you have trouble sticking to it, it's a bad plan. Full stop. I don't care what the science is between that high volume, German volume training, intermittent fasting, keto, Atlantis-based diet is. If you have trouble sticking to something consistently, it's flat out a bad plan for you. It's just not, it can't work. So that's why we always start off with, what can you just stick to? What habits can you stick to? You can have a great plan, but if you have trouble sticking to it, it's not a great plan. So even if you're saying, well, all I can do is commit to like 10 push-ups a day. Great, wonderful. But that's all I can do. That's a great plan. That's an awesome routine if you can stick to it. If you can't stick to doing 100 push-ups a day, then that's a bad plan. So consistency is the first variable we've got to look at. And of course, progression towards the fundamental stimulus we're trying to create that I cover in my book, Micro Workouts. And that's just as simple as, are you getting your muscles to work harder over time? Are you improving the proficiency of whatever you're trying to do? I want to be a better bowler. Okay, great. So you can practice 100 hours a day or a week or whatever, but if you're not getting better at bowling, then it's not working for you. So how do you get better at doing it? That's the thing. If you got those 2 things, literally routine program however the hell you want around it. Do whatever exercises you want, whatever routines, whatever variables, change it however you see fit. Those are your 2 compass needles. If I do this, it's easier to stick to. Or if I do this, I'll be more progressive in my ability to do that thing. Okay, great. Then that's all it needs to be. That's it. Don't worry too much about what's the better variable and stuff. You got those 2 things, it's good. It's done. Finished. End of story. Move on. The routine is as good as it's going to be. Don't worry about trying to Da Vinci Code, finagle it around so that you're optimizing things. All right. Let's get to some more questions. Earthlight, Matt, love your videos. Thank you. First time I catch a live on this one. Welcome, Earthlight. Welcome. Is it a good idea to use bands at maximum stretch to achieve an overcoming yielding hybrid isometric effect? Awesome question. Yes, I do believe that's a case, because when it comes to isometrics, and there's a whole quantifiable aspect that Dragon Door's trying to minimize with the ISO chain, or get dialed in and stuff like that. People often forget that the classic way that isometrics was done was on a York isometric rack. And a York isometric rack is, boy, if you can find one of these things, they're pretty hard to find these days. I once delivered some equipment to a guy in his basement, and I saw one. I was like, what the hell is that? Think of like a squat rack at a gym, like one of those power racks where it's got the 4 posts and a bar or something that connects them as a safety and stuff. Think of that, but about that wide, or not wide, but like deep from the wall, about that much. What you would do is you would take a barbell and you would load it with a weight that you could lift with, like, let's say 70% or whatever. And you would lift it, but it wouldn't lift all the way because there would be pins that would prevent you from lifting it. So you do like a barbell curl. I'd say you got 95 pounds on there, and you'd lift it off the bottom pins, but then you'd press it as hard as you could against the top pins. So you have a load that you're using to kind of quantify, and you're also creating some isometric against a live resistance, and then you're pushing against for the remainder of the resistance that you can hold. So it's kind of, like you said, a hybrid isometric style. And that's like the gold standard of how you want to do isometrics. That's the best way to go about it. The iso chain is very close to that because it's got the spring and everything else like that. It's also way cheaper than buying the rack and the barbell and the plates and everything like that. So it's a good way to go about it. But circling back, bands are a very close second, because you can have a degree of quantifiable resistance with bands. It's kind of subjective because, of course, the more you stretch, the more it fights you, of course. But you can quantify what the band is and how far you're stretching with the exercise. And then you go as far as you can to try and get the rest of that isometric. And if you really want to take it to the next level, you combine bands with an iso trainer. So you would have like an iso trainer, WorldFit iso trainer. You would have a band and it would stretch, and then you would hit the limit of where the iso trainer is. And that would give you a true overcoming isometric, because you can't go further than the stretch of the iso trainer. And that would be a good way to combine the two, and be a little finagling with the equipment and stuff, but that's a good way to go about it. So I really like bands for the isometric stuff. It's a good thing to play with, and it's a really good way to kind of get some isometric quantification in there as well. Gunnar is saying, just ask yourself, this is making me a better hunter warrior that is a basic objective goal for the male body, or lover, or athlete, or whatever you're trying to go for. And this goes along with what I was talking about earlier. One of the best ways to really have laser focus on your attention is, what exactly are you going for? What exactly is your goal? And the more specific your goal is, the better you can dial things in. I'm a martial artist, so yeah, I want to be a better warrior. But if you're not a martial artist, then who cares how hard you can punch? It's not really that important. I don't hunt for my food. I go grocery shopping, so I don't need to hunt. It's not important to me. It always boils down to what's important to you, and that's where you want to be putting your attention in as far as getting what you want. Hey, Lent, it's good to see you. Hey, Matt, feedback is one of the greatest ways to learn, but I know not everyone can have access to certain experts. How do you go about improving one's intrinsic feedback? This is very good, and actually, I'm going to be writing a book on this fairly short. It's one of my quick reads, the RDP quick reads, is the aspect of self-coaching. So one thing that I'm always recommending, as I've said before, record yourself. We've all got video cameras now, right? We've all got video cameras in our pocket. So just have someone record yourself doing a set. You're going to observe a lot by watching, as Yogi Berra always said. You're going to observe a whole lot of things from just watching that. So that alone will do a whole lot. Just watching yourself can be a humbling experience. A lot of people don't like to do that, of course, but it will be very telling. The other thing too is that simple act of keeping a workout log. When we have a workout log, we naturally have that introspective assessment, because most of us, we go through the set and we stop and we're like, oh, I wonder what's going on TikTok these days. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, I got that text from my mother. I got to reply back. We're not even thinking about the set, right? But if we have a log and we do a couple of sets and we're like, okay, got that. Oh, that's right. I remind myself, keep the elbows in. Did I keep the elbows in? Yeah. But, and it's like, what am I going to write down? I need to get my shoulders back more. I recognized on that video that my right shoulder is not back. Okay, keep the right shoulder back more. Boom. There you go. On your log, the scoreboard progression log gives you the GPS for what your workouts are. So keeping a log is another big thing in and of itself. And then the last thing that I highly recommend, and this is probably the more obvious that we don't pay attention to enough, is what is the technical erosion going on in your set? People say, what do I do to improve? It's simple. What is your technique doing as you fatigue? So let's say you do 10 pull-ups, you do your first pull-up as good as you possibly can. Well, your first pull-up isn't going to be as good, or isn't going to be on the same level as your last pull-up. Your last pull-up's going to be worse somehow. So how is that technique eroding? Range of motion, body position, breathing, speed, tempo. What is changing? That thing that changes and falls apart under fatigue, that's the thing to work on. That's the thing that's going to get you stronger. And that's going to be a very personal, introspective sort of thing, but it's also going to be fairly self-obvious once you're paying attention to it. Okay, so on to number 4. We've got burn fat, store fat. Ignore that. Just focus more on general energy intake and expenditure. 2, inflammation outside of like chronic levels that you need to see a doctor or go to the hospital for. I don't worry about it at all. Instead, focus on stress and recovery. 3 is routine. Again, I don't care what your workout routine is. Just make sure that you have consistent habits and they're progressive in the direction for your specific goals, if you have specific goals. So number 4, the thing that I don't really think we should focus too much attention on, and I think we get distracted with too much, is specific exercises for specific muscles. And this goes along with, okay, this exercise works this muscle, this exercise is for this muscle, what exercise is best for the medial delt and the upper chest and the sweep and the quads and all these sorts of things and stuff. Now, not that this isn't bad advice, of course, but it kind of goes in the wrong direction of how muscles actually work, because exercises fundamentally don't make your muscles work. It's true. It's like the saying the road makes your car accelerate. No, your car is accelerating on the road, but it's not because of the road that your car is accelerating. It's the same thing with muscles. Your muscles aren't working specifically exactly for that exercise. Instead, you're using the muscle in the application of the exercise. So when we get lost down this rabbit hole of what's the best exercise for this muscle or that muscle and stuff, the real solution we want to have is, of course, improving your neuromuscular proficiency of how well can you engage and use the muscle in the first place. So I was talking before, our friend called in, is like, I've got trouble engaging these muscles. Yeah, that's a real problem, because it doesn't matter if an exercise is supposed to work the muscle. If your brain has trouble engaging it, it's not going to make it bigger and stronger very much. But the opposite is the case. If you can get good control over that muscle, that tension control, anything that can potentially use that muscle for the application of that exercise is probably going to be pretty effective. So that's what we want to focus on, is how well do you use your own muscles? Because when we're looking at, okay, what kind of push-up is best for the upper chest? Dude, I use my upper chest on everything. Dips, all push-up variations, all handstand variations, pike push-ups, everything that is pushing of any sort is working my upper chest, because I'm always engaging my entire chest throughout the exercise. I don't need an upper chest exercise because everything's working the upper chest. And it's going to be a hell of a lot more effective if you're using a muscle a lot more with everything than if you're relying on it to be passively active with 1 or 2 exercises that you kind of get dialed in once in a while. And that's the real secret. If you want to make a muscle bigger and stronger, use it all the time with everything that can potentially be using that muscle. So in the case of the lats, people are like, I can't build up my lats, I'm doing pull-ups. You may have trouble engaging and activating the lats. But once you can engage and activate your lats very well, Yeah, they respond very well to pull-ups and rows and bicep curls and rear flies and as a stabilizer for your push-ups and for handstand stabilization. Hell, opening a car door, you're like, oh, there's a lat. Yep, I'm using it. That's what we really want, is improving that neuromuscular proficiency. So instead of focusing our attention on what exercise do I do for this muscle, focus on how well can I engage and use the muscle all the time. And then the actual exercise you do is less contingent on does it work the muscle and just what do I like to do? What do I have resources to do? And then just using the muscle for those exercises. And it's going to be a hell of a lot more effective to make it much bigger and stronger. All right. Zizerp. I like that, the username there. Excuse me, I drink my seltzer water here. Hey, Matt, what should I do? End up getting tendonitis after doing a set of chin-ups by my elbow. And top forearm only hurts in chin-up style pull-ups, but not normal normal pull-ups or commando pull-ups. Yeah, so this is what I'm talking about. So it's, again, all down to how you're using the muscles. So when we're using our muscles well, we're creating more stability along the joints. And when we have stress in a joint, that means some of your muscles somewhere are not doing their job. And I would bet money it's your lats. So when you're here, you're winging. You're probably hunched up and up with the shoulders, and you're not packing and depressing your shoulders down very, very aggressively. So here's what you're going to do. One is always do things that avoid pain, because if you've got tendonitis or any sort of strain in the elbows, it doesn't matter if you do it correctly or you do it proficiently enough, because you have an injury. If I twisted my ankle, I could have the best walking technique in the world. It's still going to be bad for my ankle because I have an injury. So you've got to make sure that you can heal up first, because nothing's going to fix anything until your actual issue heals up. So always do things that just avoid the pain. So if you've got certain grips that aren't going to cause that pain, then do those sorts of grips. And don't do things that have that pain. And yeah, I know it sucks, but it takes forever for that stuff to heal. But when you do your chins, like scapular pull-ups, you get that supinated grip, and you do your pull-ups with your shoulders up and down. I'm willing to bet anything, you're probably going to get any range whatsoever with that, because it's harder to get it there. It's harder to pack the shoulders down with a supinated grip, but that's going to teach you how to do it. And so practice that for the time being, as long as there's no pain. And then when you are doing your chins, I just call everything pull-ups because you're just pulling up. We don't need a different term for it. Focus on pack and pull. So you lock those shoulders down as aggressively as possible right at the initial part of your ascent. And that's going to give you a better alignment and get that stress right out of those elbows. And also, that torquing the elbow, because your elbow's winging out just a bit. And it doesn't take much. A few millimeters is going to make all the difference in the world. All right. So we got the last one here. Last thing that we get so distracted with, why we are focusing our attention on the wrong things. And the last thing is, quote, what they do. What is this person doing? What is that person doing? I get asked all the time, what is my workout program like? What is my diet like? Honestly, who the hell cares? What the hell does it matter? The answer, nothing. Nothing. My biceps have almost nothing to do with my workout program, with what I'm doing. Almost nothing. They're there because I have progressive muscle tension. You do whatever, with the workouts and stuff. It doesn't matter. And even if it did matter, who cares what I do? It's what you do that really matters. What you think is best. I love calisthenics. I love bodyweight training, overcoming isometrics. It's wonderful. It's great. I love it all day long. It's working so great for me. But if it's not in your bag, so what? Who cares? If you're like, God, I hate doing pull-ups and chin-ups, I'd rather, get tortured for secrets than do pull-ups again. Then you're not doing pull-ups. So what if some guy out there on Instagram has this particular workout and diet program and he's got the most amazing body in the world? That has nothing to do with you. Is it going to do the same thing for you? No, not at all. Because what they've done is they've figured out what works best for them. And it's your job to figure out what works best for you. And inevitably, it's going to be quite different from that. And as I was saying before, there is a lot of variation. One person can do high volume training, but you're better with low volume. One person does a ton of cardio. You hardly do any. It doesn't matter what they are doing or what they have behind it, because the bottom line is that the methods we use are actually a rather trivial influence on the overall result. And I do pull-ups, grind style calisthenics. I'm a martial artist and a mountain biker. How much does that really play a role in my current level of fitness? Honestly, not that much. Honestly, it really doesn't have a whole lot to that, because there's a lot of other variables like genetics and age and a whole bunch of things that just come down, albeit largely to luck, that also play their role. So we can never look at one person and be like, oh, they've got this result because they do X, Y, or Z. It's like, yeah, that plays its role, but that's not why they've got that result. They're not that big and jacked because of that type of exercise they do. Because you could take 1,000 other people, do the exact same thing and not even get close to that level of result. Some people would even go backwards from it. So use other people's examples for maybe ideas like, oh, I like that. That sounds like a fun thing to do. That might work. Okay, I would like to give that a try. Great, wonderful. Use it for inspiration. But who cares what they do? It's what you're doing and what's working for you that matters most. And at the end of the day, it always comes down to what's going to be better for you. And that's why my grind style calisthenics program is always basically just a template for ideas. Like, okay, this is how we go about things, but mess up with it, like change it around by all means. If you want to add in or subtract or change and rearrange and move things around because you think it's going to be better for you, great, have at it. It's what's most important and dialed in for you that's going to be the best thing. And it doesn't matter if Joe Schmo over there got the best results with a particular method. If you do the exact opposite and feel it's better for you, then it's better for you. End of story right there. It doesn't matter what he's gotten the best results from. It's what you're going to get the best results from. You be your own boss and carve your own path, as it were. If you want more ideas on that sort of thing, as always, the Red Delta Project library that is expanding at a breakneck pace is down below on Amazon. It's a sponsor for today's episode. As always, the new quick reads are up there as well. The PDFs on the RDP merch store, as well as snazzy t-shirts like so, is also available there. And thank you everybody so much for listening, watching, coming in with your questions. I do so appreciate it. And we'll do this again next week. I'll talk to you then. Till then, be fit and live free.